afternoon and welcome to Connect to the Colorado Business Roundtable. We're so excited to continue our great Senate race with the Denver Business Journal. My name is Jeff Roundtable, and with me I have Ed Seelover, reporter extraordinaire for the DBJ. We're bringing in our series of interviewing U.S. Senate candidates. Ed, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on again, Jeff.
I'm excited today. This time to have a longtime friend of the Colorado Business Roundtable and somebody that we've worked with extensively on one of our key issues and pillars of the Colorado Business Roundtable, immigration. Joining us today, U.S. Senate candidate Michelle Warren. Michelle, thanks for joining us.
Jeff, it's really great to be back with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, we're so honored. And then we're going to go ahead and jump into several questions today, but I want to start with immigration. We had a presidential candidate that kind of focused on, at that point, a single issue, Tom Tancredo, who was running on immigration. I know you extensively related to the area of immigration. So for our viewers and those that may not know you, including myself, love to start to get a little bit more about the insights of who is Michelle Warren and why are you running for U.S. Senate?
Well, great. Well, thanks for asking me that question. You're right. You and I have worked extensively on the issue of immigration, but I actually am a policy expert in many different issues. Immigration happens to be a national issue, and so it's something that gets broad national coverage. But as far as who am I am a Colorado resident. I came to Colorado in the middle of high school and came back after a brief time away in college, and then I was a teacher in Dallas Independent School District. I came back to my home state 23 years ago with my new husband, and we moved downtown and started a home for homeless teen girls right off of Colfax. And the next year started a community development organization called Open Door Ministries, which that house went under, and we've continued to build that organization together specifically to address homelessness, poverty, and addiction. After doing that for a number of years, alongside my very short 3-year teaching career, I began to find myself walking into advocacy and community organizing. I don't think I had any clue where I was heading, except that I knew that my neighbors needed some help. I knew that I wanted to join with them in trying to work on issues that were important to them. I had, of course, started some social justice nonprofit organizations and realized that while they're good, it's a great way to spend resources and time. If you don't have good systems, then you're not getting the whole job done. So I kept a foot in the nonprofit social justice world and then a foot in advocacy. And within a couple years realized, I'm in over my head. I don't really think my math degree is going to help me with public policy and advocacy. So I actually went to night school and studied public policy formation and multi-sector collaborations and began to really try to understand the policies that we were shaping to address issues like homelessness and addiction, etc. And then, of course, got into immigration because I have lived the last 22 years in Denver at the corner of Federal and Alameda. And my zip code has over 75% of my neighbors are Latino. And so I added working on immigration. A lot of as the timing actually worked around Tom Tancredo's race, because that's when I began to realize, what is he saying? How does that implicate my neighbors? And I began to learn more and started to join that as well.
And so how did that lead you then to where we are today, sitting here talking about the U.S. Senate race? Talk about how you kind of looked at your background, decided, I want to jump in, and talk a little bit about what made you say, I can offer something that this very large field of people can't offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I think our democracy is in a very different state than it has been for a while. And I have worked in politics for about 15 years, both as a policy expert and a person who builds coalitions around important policy issues. So I know politics, and like I said, even in the last 10 years, have worked specifically around Congress. I started in the Mountain West, and that's when Jeff and I began to work with each other around the Colorado Compact in 2012, and it continued to work as I went to the Mountain West and then the Western United States, and then continued to build coalitions nationally on immigration reform and education equity and mass incarceration. So I know politics, but I also know that I care about our country and I care about our democracy. And I think that this is a very serious season to be stewarding when I look at our democracy and the fracturing. And it's not just that we have so much partisan games happening in Washington, D.C. What I see about people, the people that I work with, the people that I build coalitions with, the average everyday Coloradan who looks and feels apathetic and angry and ambivalent, those are some strong words. When you have a representative democracy, if people are feeling angry and apathetic and ambivalent, we're never going to get where we want to be. And I think one of the reasons they feel that way is they don't trust politicians. You know, they don't trust, for sure, career politicians, and feel like they aren't being heard and they aren't being represented. So I know I have things to offer. In this race, I have more congressional experience than anyone who's running, you know, specifically these last 10 years, building coalitions and listening to people, everyday people, bring their concerns. But I think that I also, the policy smarts definitely at the federal level, but in the same time, I'm an average Coloradan. You know, I didn't want to get into politics. I didn't try to seek, you know, the corridors of power, I guess you could say. I've just always been trying to help people exactly where they are, to build coalitions and to build support, to raise money, to do whatever I can for our whole community to move forward together. And I know I've got things to offer. I have a seasoned career, the last 26 years, you know, building bridges and bringing people together. And like I said, that with the policy know-how, I found myself, I'll just say it this way, more frustrated on the sidelines than actually jumping in. There are some really pressing issues that are facing people in our communities, in our state of Colorado, in our country. Conversations that people aren't willing to have. Immigration is just one of them. You know, we need to talk about energy needs. We need to talk about automation. I have almost heard nothing about the impact of automation. We need to talk about training programs and education. I could continue to go on, but there are some really dire issues. There are really good solutions that need to be brought to the table, and it has to rise above political partisan games. Because when we just play politics with people's lives, we jeopardize their future and we jeopardize our entire collective future.
So what do you think, Jeff? There's a good list of areas we could start out with here. Where should we start out? All right. Well, let's go to immigration then, since I know this is an area that's been a subject of yours, and it's an area that business obviously is very interested in. The workforce period is a need, especially here in Colorado. Talk about what you would like to see done with immigration, specifically in regard to some of the workforce needs, whether that be H-2As and H-2Bs or whatnot. What needs to change in your mind?
We need to change a few things. First of all, let's just talk about the value of people. I'll get to the numbers, and I don't mind getting to the numbers, but the rise in white nationalism and this anti-immigrant sentiment needs leadership to speak into the truth of the value of people and their contributions. We have 11.5 million undocumented people in our country. Our immigration system has been failing since the late 60s. We've been kicking this can down the lane. And the reason we need to talk about the value and contribution of people is of those 11.5 million people, over 80% of them have been here for about 20 years or more. Because we continue to perpetuate an American adage that says we want your work, we don't want you. And we need to look back at the history and learn from our history to say, you know what, we need you. So you're right, our workforce needs, we can talk about the agriculture industry, we can talk about the construction industry, we can talk about, you know, some of the science and technology and engineering and math industries. We don't have the workers that we need. We have a robust economy, especially here in Colorado, but across the country. And if you want to continue to feed an economy, you need the workers to meet it. So one, we need to respect the value and contribution of the people that we have. So that 11.5 million people, we need to create a path to citizenship. Not only is the economics on our side, but the country is as well. And that's what I'm talking about, partisan games. When you start, you know, putting out surveys, and there's been so many surveys from from, even the American Chamber of Commerce, always supporting this. We see it in the state of Colorado, and our chambers are Hispanic Chamber and the Denver Business Chamber, Aurora, I can continue to list where we value and we understand, the contribution of immigrants, and we need to create a path to citizenship. There's actually a lot that unites us on this. It's the partisan games that keep us from going for it. So one, I want to create a path to citizenship. There's a couple ways to do it. You can change the registry date on a law that we've had in the book since 1929. You can just say everybody who's been here since 2007, we'll just say that, or maybe even 20 years, 2001. And we just change. If you've been here, you pay a fine, you do a background check, you can move forward with registry. Actually, just one little date will make it all go away. That would include dreamers. That would include temporary protected status workers. Groups of undocumented immigrants. Or we can do what, Congress put in action up until 2014. We had a very good bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform bill that the Gang of Eight, Senator Bennett was a part of that Gang of Eight in the Senate to create. We had a good majority, Republicans and Democrats coming together, and that would have created a very long, I think it was a 13-year, path to citizenship. I don't care what we do. I think we just need to be honest with the fact that people deserve an opportunity to move forward. So that's number one. Number two is we have a very outdated, crippling visa system. And I think I'll just mention H-2As because we are, right before Thanksgiving. We're going to gather around food, and we're taking for granted the fact that foreign hands are picking our food, either inside or outside our borders. I was just on the Western Slope with John Harold from Tuxedo Corn and a group of other farmers that were talking about the H-2A program, that they're wanting to get the workers that they need the legal way, but the bureaucratic red tape is awful. The timing causes so much stress, and they already have so many needs. As a farmer, you're worried about the rain. You're worried about, the soil. We just continue to compound. Oh, you're worried about the workers? Well, we have Americans who don't want to do the jobs, and now we've got this very archaic, outdated, troublesome bureaucratic red tape system with the H-2A program. And what I was talking to John and the other farmers about was when you look at Colorado, we are proud of our agricultural industry. We're proud of the contribution, and we are creating so much burden. And so we need to work on our visa system. You probably should jump in. This is kind of boring. I'm just talking here. You want to ask me a couple other questions?
Look, you were right up our alley there talking about policy. So that's where we wanted to have this go.
Well, we've never looked at immigration as an economic tool. If you look at our system, you don't see this change and this ebb and flow with supply and demand. And so that's why we need to be honest. We see rises in our undocumented population historically when we have labor shortages. We see a decline when we don't. And so, we really could look at it as an economic driver. I share that after I talk about the value of people, because I don't want to look at people as just what they can give to us, on the economy, because people are more than just their jobs, right? So I want to value all their contribution. But so that's, like I said, that's about as much as the weeds as I'm going to get into. But we really need to be honest about our economic needs and allow our workforce to meet that. And, as far as agriculture, this is something that people don't realize is that we don't have a year-round agricultural visa. People on the Western Slope, they know it. The dairy farm has this double-edged sword. They're not only we don't have a year-round agricultural visa, but dairy is not considered agriculture. So if you think about it, even if we included the seasonal ag to include dairy, I don't know. Do you know any cows who just want to be milked seasonally?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we have to. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Every day, a couple times a day. And so we just don't have the workers. So those are some of those. Be honest with where we're at. Create opportunities for people and business and farmers to flourish. Because frankly, I like ice cream. I like eating beef. I like Olathe corn. We all do. We're proud of our peaches, but we need the labor force. And then I think another part of our immigration system is our family-based immigration system. We have it. We just don't have the right amount of numbers to meet the need. We want people to be able to have, marriages that are from people from other countries. We want adoption. We want, people to be able to petition for their mom.
And when you say we don't have the numbers, I assume you mean we need higher numbers. numbers in our family base. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We've got backlogs that are crazy. So
how much are we talking about there? I mean, how much of a percentage?
Depends on the country. All right, it depends on the country.
Okay.
Okay, so the backlogs are usually the longest for like the Philippines and India and Mexico. So we're looking at 20, 30 years you have to wait. There's a woman, Rosa Sabito, she's in Mancos, Colorado. Her mother petitioned for her and has since died. Rosa, I mean, what makes this serious is she's one of the 4 women in sanctuary. So she's in the system, in this backlog. She legally has a way to get there because her mother petitioned for her, but it's been so many years and her mother has passed away and some other things because of changing dynamics. She hasn't done anything, but she's been flagged for deportation. There's no reason for it. And so now she's being threatened to have to leave a place that she's been for almost 3 decades. You know, her father's still here, but her mother has passed and we have huge backlogs. So that's what I mean. It's not that the system is so, bad, and we want parents to be able to get their children to get their parents. Those are important values. We should keep families together. It's a very practical, humane, natural thing to try to do that, but we don't have the numbers. And that is because in 1965, we went from a quota system that was set in 1924 to a number system that was set in 1965. And we just don't change the numbers with demand. And that's the visas, not just family visas, that's the economic visa problem too, is we cap the numbers at a very low rate. So, we want to work at honoring family petitioning. And then I think border security is a good, important conversation. The United States has the rights, it's a sovereign nation. It should defend its borders. What I see, just from the policy wonkish side is that we don't do hardly anything at the Atlantic and the Pacific coasts. We do not look at cargo ships the way we should, the way, getting things in. Look at the opioid epidemic in China. Those are some of the biggest drug cartels that are coming in. We actually have a really safe southern border. You wouldn't know it from the news, but I'll give you the story of the migrant caravan. I don't know, have you looked at the numbers recently about how many people are living south of our borders in Mexico just waiting to seek asylum? It's like 60,000 people. So we got 60,000 people just sitting south of our border and not coming through what has been dubbed our porous border. Our border is not porous. All right, we've got great boots on the ground. We've got great technology. We don't need an archaic, expensive physical border. We need to invest in border technology that is more, heat. There's things that we can do. But the reality is people are waiting. They are trying to ask for help and trying to ask for asylum. And I think the last few months, or I would say the year, because the caravans have been around for about a year now, at that volume, we're seeing that we're defending our southern borders so well that we can keep people from even asking the legal way of asylum. So those are some of the internal United States policies that I would want to see changed. We've got people migrating. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I want to jump in a little bit here because I know we've been talking about immigration for a little while. But I think one of the things you brought up early was this idea that there are Americans who don't want these jobs right now. I think especially in Colorado, as we look out, we see people, even if they do want jobs, who don't have the skills for some of the ways our technology, our economy is changing to. You've talked about workforce development. What is the federal government's role in workforce development and in ensuring that we can move forward from some of the old technologies and the old professions that dominated here to ready our citizens for the new economy?
Absolutely. Well, the federal government has unique roles that the state and the local, state and local government is really kind of where the action of business is, right? And I think the federal government, especially as it keeps its role in the global market, as well as the United States market, has this big 30,000 foot view and seeing what is the mechanisms that are moving around supply and demand. And one of the roles, there's several, but one, I really think that we need to have a more serious conversation about automation. The numbers are very alarming. If you look at in 10 years, it is predicted that 73 million United States workers are going to be out of a job because of automation. So just like when we see transitions. Okay, we learn from our history. You know, we went through the Industrial Revolution. My dad was an engineer, and I remember when engineers just used paper and pencil, and architects, and they were either offered retirement early or they had to move to, you know, computer-based. Then we've had the internet. I mean, that's some of the role of the federal government. We can see a little bit about what's coming around the corner, and we need to equip our citizenry to respond to it. So I know Andrew Yang is talking about a little bit, and he's talking about solutions that I probably don't think are the best. But I do appreciate that he continues to raise awareness around automation, because while we don't ever want to hold ourselves back, you know, we want to continue to be competitive and meet our growing demands, we need to be prepared for it. And what that means is we need to provide the training for young people, so that, I mean, automation doesn't mean you don't have a job. It just means you need to be trained to be able to run robots and, you know, those kinds of high skill jobs that often we think we don't even have enough engineers. We don't have enough, you know, technicians. And that's something the federal government really needs to do a serious investment in. And that's not just around workforce development. Well, I mean, I guess it's a bigger picture. It includes education. Those are the kinds of conversations we need to be having at the federal level around education. Are we training our citizens to be competitive in the 21st century?
Okay. Jeff, your thoughts on that?
Oh, I'm sorry that we don't have Jeff. And you know,
all right. Looks like we'll get back to kind of talking about this here. Where does the federal government role start and end versus the state's role? Because we've been dealing with this in the state level for a long time, trying to work through our community colleges to provide job training for new economy factories that are coming up. How does the federal government do this without overstepping itself and inserting itself into a place where local government should be?
Yeah, I think those are the age-old questions, right? And then you also look at tax policy. How much taxes should we be taking out, you know, that won't disincentivize work? The federal government has a pretty big appropriations role. Sometimes I feel like the federal government gets into the weeds of things that it shouldn't. You know, and I think this is some of the big investment. The federal government has the capacity to really invest in industries that, like we were talking about automation, being prepared for that, making sure that we have good, strong appropriations to education and to job training. You know, something I hope we talk about, and I'd like to talk about in this podcast, is really our energy needs, because that's another thing we need to transition.
Don't worry, we'll talk energy
here. Because that's something the federal government really needs to work around as well, and really help create policies that are framed in a way that can move local and state municipalities forward. You know, again, like I said, the federal government is a big player. It is more that 30,000 foot view, dealing with foreign governments, trying to ensure that we are creating good relationships. I mean, we got some really sticky relationships right now. You know, even the Chinese tariffs, and you know, there's a lot of people who just feel like that's really just a tax on the American people, from steel to, you know, cell phones. And so I definitely think the federal government has a role, and it is really to make sure that the flow of business continues, that our relationships, like I said, with our trade partners are working in a way that is successful. But I do think that the state and the local level, it's exciting, you know, as far as the business community and workforce.
There's a couple ways to go here, but as long as you picked up the topic of trade, let me move on to that here. Your thoughts in general about the current trade policy, and if you were elected to the Senate, two things. One, how would you change it? And two, how would you assert your power as a senator? It seems like this has been a one-man show right now. What would you do differently, and how would you, as a senator, assert that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it has been a one-man show. I'm not even sure if it's a whole show. I think it might just be a Twitter storm, but it has had huge ramifications. It's going to take us decades to undo the harm of the last few years. That's just the reality. We need global partners. We need to be uniting with people to do good. We don't want to go out of our way to find evil people to do bad, you know, and so we have to come back to the table. I think, you know, there may be, foreign governments may be willing to forgive us for a lot of what we have done the last couple of years to undo, you know, some of our relationships, but they won't have patience for much longer, you know, and so I think that is, trade is all about relationships, really, and it's about a posture of, how can we negotiate good ways to, if the communication is shut down, and not only is the communication shut down, but I have made you the villain and you are evil, and anything that you assert yourself, I'm just going to demonize you. Everybody knows that's not going to be good for negotiations. Okay, so we've looked at that culture. As far as the Senate, one of the reasons I'm running is I am a proud Democrat. So I want to say I'm support Team Blue all the way. But I tell my fellow Democrats, if we're going to face the 21st century challenges that are before us, the raw truth is we can't go it alone. And we cannot just wait for a majority, and we cannot just strong arm the other side when we have one. We really need to set tables of mutuality and exchange that's built on respect and trust. I know that is completely foreign to politics, but that's one of the main reasons that I'm running.
Excellent. We are in the great Senate race. If you are just tuning in here, is Jeff Wasden and Ed Sealover, a collaboration between the Colorado Business Roundtable and the Denver Business Journal. We're talking trade. We are talking education. Let's talk a little bit about one of the other hallmarks of the economy here if we're going to make trade happen, and that's transportation.
Thank you for bringing that up.
We have been dealing with the transportation funding issue for better than a decade here in Colorado, and there's been little that's come from the federal government to have a major effect on what we're doing. If elected, what should, if anything, the federal government be doing in terms of transportation funding and getting it down to the states?
That is a huge failure of the last couple of years. President Trump kept continuing to talk about working in bipartisan ways for infrastructure. And transportation infrastructure, the way we got the interstate system, the federal government, that is one of their main roles, is to fund the construction, the maintenance, bridges. That's just, I can't say anything else. I mean, it's such a simple sentence. Come together and get it worked on. Because Colorado, I mean, I appreciate the efforts on Prop CC. I voted for it. I support it. I know it failed. It was a way to try to get money into what I truly believe is a role for the federal government. So the federal government needs to come together and fund transportation infrastructure, because they are the biggest branch of government that can do that. It kind of goes back to their appropriations. But I also think that, like I said, we need to be looking around the corner. That's the role of the federal government. What is coming? What can you see? You've got all of these people working in an inter and an intrastate collaborative. Tell us what we're seeing. I cannot believe, especially with all of our energy and climate issues, that we have not done a serious investment in high-speed rail. I'm kind of tired of kicking that conversation down the road. When you look at climate, when you look at the contribution of, it's not even just cars. I mean, cars, but semi-trucks, and then you look at jet fuel. That's the second biggest contributor is the transportation emissions. And if we're going to have a serious conversation about energy and climate, then we need to invest in high-speed rail. And so I think that's another thing that even if the state of Colorado is like, man, we really want to see high-speed rail. I mean, I would try to applaud it, but no Kickstarter or tax is going to get that, right? You need the federal government to value it. And I think it's time for Colorado to get the representation it needs to demand things like transportation infrastructure, as well as forward-thinking modes of transportation like high-speed rail. I don't know. Have you gone up the I-70 corridor towards the west? Thanksgiving alone.
And I try to avoid it because of some of the reasons we're talking about here. But is that where you would put it? If you were, we'll talk about funding in just a second, but if you were waving the wand, or if you were directing that funding, is that where you'd want it, along the I-70 corridor here in Colorado?
Here in Colorado, absolutely. I mean, I think it makes it's the most logical sense. When you think of the $1 million highway, think of just even what it's called, the $1 million highway. It is not. There's commerce that is going through it, but it is not the same way as the I-70 corridor.
So where does the funding come from for that? And
that's
frankly,
a federal government thing.
It's a big picture issue here. But I mean, do we have that funding right now and we need to allocate it better, or do we need to look at new areas of funding for transportation? Are you happy with, for example, the gas tax that hasn't been raised since 1993 in the federal government?
So I think there's always an importance to look at is the tax that is the revenue coming in for transportation infrastructure adequate to meet our needs? I think we're going to have to really look at increasing the transportation budget, and that is an appropriations thing, for sure. I think there are creative ways as far as the gas tax, but I also want to be careful because I feel like we throw around the gas tax so often, and that really has an impact on middle income and low income families as well. And so I definitely think we need to look at how we're going to, obviously we're going to have to look at how we're going to fund things, but I also think that we need to prioritize how we're going to use the funding. I don't think the American people, when I talk to Coloradans, like I said, they're apathetic, they're sort of angry, they're skeptical their money's going anywhere, and it's a hard sell sometimes for bridges and highway repair. But I think that you have to, as leadership, begin to almost forecast. It's not even just business forecasting, inspire people to realize, like, this is a good thing. When you look at Dwight D. Eisenhower and the Interstate Highway Act that he put in place, no American wanted to pay for that. I mean, that was not it. They ended up calling it something along the lines as the protection and defense. It just finished World War II, and we need to keep the American people kind of nervous and worried that if we don't take their tax dollars and put it in this huge interstate, that the Russians are going to come. I mean, if you really look back at the articles, that was some of the conversations that were happening because fear sells. And I think that's horrible. I think we need a strong sense of leadership that inspiration should sell too. Our future should sell. And I think there's a lot of young people. There's going to be more millennials than anybody potentially voting in this election. And they care about the climate and they care about their future.
And we're going to go there in just a second, but would this be a mix then? Would you still like
Sure,
to put
absolutely.
money to highways?
To.
Okay. I
don't think the current funding streams are sufficient, but at the same time, I'm not a senator, so I'm not looking at every back channel. That's the sort of the behemoth of federal, policy. And so there's a part with, it's hard for me not to believe there aren't ways to reappropriate some of the funds, especially when you look at climate and you look at job growth and economic growth, maybe some education. I mean, there's different layers that would go into a high-speed rail, per se, okay? But I do think that we're going to have to be honest about where we are financially and see if there's new sources of revenue that we need to put in, tax revenue that we need to put in. So I withhold yes, I want a high-speed rail tax with, I would need to see a little bit more information, but I do think that if we're going to address 21st century challenges, we're going to have to look at all of the sources of revenue and make some smart choices.
Well, let's get into the idea of climate change here.
It's not the idea. The fact of climate change? Yes, I'd be happy to talk about the fact of climate change.
Let's get into the idea of how the federal government is going to be dealing with climate change here. And I'm going to start the conversation at a very specific point. We'll broaden it from there.
Okay.
But Green New Deal that is on the table. Yes, no, or take it in a direction that you would like to go.
I think resolutions like the Green New Deal are incredibly inspiring and aspirational. I'm a public policy person, and so I want to see how it lands in pragmatic solutions. I appreciate the tenets of it. It actually talks about high-speed rail. I'm a big proponent of high-speed rail. It also talks about the value and contribution of labor and work. And that's what the Green New Deal, the New Deal was really looking at. So, of course, we need to do as much as we can when we repair infrastructure to value every contributor. Our union workers. And I appreciate that they even specifically call out the value of indigenous workers. So I appreciate, like I said, the aspirations of it and feel like we as a country have done a lot to undermine the contribution of people at different socio and economic levels. So again, grateful for that and really think we need to move into policy solutions that value everybody's contribution and their work and give them the the pay that they're owed and they're deserved. I think that those, we need to move away from fossil fuel. I also, if you look on my website, I talk a lot about energy. So if you wanted to ask me, I know you haven't, but I'm going to offer my top 3 priority issues. Immigration is number 1 because only Congress can fix it. If you're running for House and the Senate, you're not talking about immigration, then you are missing the opportunity to fix one of our most outdated, archaic, detrimental laws. Second is energy, because I believe the climate crisis is real. But we are not going to have a smart conversation about the climate crisis if we only throw around aspirations like the Green New Deal and don't talk about energy sources that are smart and sustainable as well as solutions. I'll go back to that. And then the third one is equity. I really believe in equity, affordable housing, healthcare, education. So that's important, because to me, when we're talking about climate, if we're not talking about energy sources and solutions, then we're not trying to fix a problem. In Colorado, I think we're number 5 in the country for being a state
that produces energy.
Produces energy.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And we are still a state that produces coal. I know one of your policy positions is we need to move away completely from coal.
We do.
Talk about how we can do that without destroying the economy of areas that rely on that right now, and also raising energy prices too high for some of our lower and middle class citizens.
Yeah, that is probably one of my most robust policy goals, right? When you read that, I know there are 1,300 coal employees in Colorado, and I know the coal resources in Colorado. So to move away from that, it recognizes my intense seriousness about the climate crisis, because when you look at different types of energy, coal is the biggest contributor. So if you're going to take away an energy source as far as that's contributing to the climate crisis, then coal is the one that you look at. However, just in any type of industry, and it's not just energy, when we move from one to the other, we need to transition with justice. So I talked about smart sources and solutions. Let me just say this, because I'm going to answer your question in it. The solutions are, moving away from fossil fuels. So what do we want? Biomass, biofuel. We want anything that's carbon free or carbon neutral. And so that's obviously wind and solar. We could look at battery, but also I think we need to look at fail-safe small modular reactors in nuclear, the same kind that we use in submarines rather. So those are the solutions. We need to really be very committed to carbon-free and carbon-neutral solutions. But the question is, how are we going to house it? And so I actually have proposed what I call an energy park. This is an older idea. I've seen it here and there, touched on it a little bit in some of our past history, but it never really took off the same way that I think it needs to be revisited and taken off. And this is a role for the federal government. An energy park provides several of those kinds of energy sources that I would share. Much like an industrial park, you would house them all. That means you can protect buffer zones. That means you go on the infrastructure, like in Pueblo and Colorado Springs with former coal or even present coal mines, you can put an energy park there. And the only way an energy park can transition those former coal jobs into a more renewable energy source is by ensuring that there's training facilities on those particular parts. I don't think it's that coal workers they want jobs. They want jobs in their community. They want jobs at equitable pay. That's an actual realistic demand, and something we need to be ensuring that as we transition out. That's why I'm careful when I don't throw around the Green New Deal, not because I don't value it, but because we need to be careful that we're not just dismissing the contributions of people, and that we carefully and strategically and aggressively move people from one particular energy job to another one. There's, when you look at some places in Colorado that would make really good energy park locations, anything sort of south of Wyoming, north of Denver, and in that maybe Fort Collins, Greeley, Weld County area. And then, like I said, around Pueblo, Colorado Springs, we have the transportation infrastructure to move them. We've got, like I said, the location, we control buffer zones, but we also have intra and interstate sharing energy capability. So, like I said, it's time for Colorado to be the focus. And as the Colorado senator, I would work to ensure that we have places like energy parks that would transition people. I met with a former director of the Department of Energy, and he was talking to me about coal and nuclear, and he said, I would live downwind of a nuclear arsenal. Now, I'm not promoting any nuclear arsenals, because he was so not worried about those particular, nuclear power hurting him. He said, but I would never live downwind of a coal plant. Coal isn't good for our climate. It isn't good for human people. We need to transition away. But when I say that, I truly care about the people who are in that industry, and that's what we need leaders that are going to fight for, not just to flippantly say, I'm done. That's not what I'm trying to communicate. I'm just saying we know it's a big contributor and we need to address it. And that's that forward 21st century, 30,000-foot view that we need congressional leaders, like I'm trying to be, to really talk about. And then, of course, there's fracking, which I would be happy to talk about fracking as well.
Thank you. It's like you're reading my mind.
You know
here.
what? You'd think I'd been running for a few months and being asked these questions.
And of course, fracking is the most cost-efficient way to get natural gas out of the ground right now. But in general, oil and gas, that's an even bigger contributor to Colorado's economy than coal is. Does the federal government need to cut back on oil and gas? And if so, what does that do to a state like this?
So I will say it this way, that the federal government needs to seriously look at the climate crisis and help the country transition away from fossil fuel, period. Okay. Fracking, specifically in Colorado, we have 60,000 fracking wells. I think Weld County might be the highest, but Garfield County, I was talking to some of the leaders in Garfield County, and they were really concerned. These are Democrats. They were very concerned because I think Garfield County has 11,000 wells, natural gas wells, and they were talking about the fact that their schools are only open for 4 days and not 5 days because we don't have the resources. They don't have the resources to keep them open. That they have limited access to health care because our state, when they implemented the Affordable Care Act, decided to redline certain rural and mountain communities so they pay 40% more in their premiums. And their hospitals in Garfield County specifically, they get money from the fracking wells to give them, their hospitals. So you've got healthcare and education being held up and propped up, by the oil and gas industry. And then you've also got wind and solar. They also get resources. So I'm really careful. To say we're going to end, fracking, we're going to end oil and gas. What I'm trying to say is we need to transition because we need to be smart. I don't think coal is an aggressive one in my mind, but we need to be honest about moving away. And the only way we're going to move away smartly is by building tables where people get a seat at the table. So, I know that we're going to have oil executives and, at the table, but we need to have local municipalities at the table. We need people who are working in the industry. We need people who, care a lot about our environment. And I think that's what we haven't seen. It isn't so much that, well, what is the timeline? We haven't even been trying. We've got people who are yelling, science isn't real, this isn't really happening. We've even got people in the oil and gas industry that aren't even saying, and helping us explain the climate crisis, even though they full well, that it's real. So I think we need to, like I said, have an honest conversation about our future and not just the air and the water, because I am concerned about the unregulated cavalier cowboy fracking industry. I think we need to capture everything. I think we need to be careful of the water table. You just go over to Tennessee, you got mercury in the water, and they'll never, ever, ever drink it again. That's serious, especially in the state of Colorado. We probably don't have time to talk about water policy. If we want to, we can. We can't mess with our water. We shouldn't mess with anybody's water, but Colorado definitely can't mess with the water. So I think we need to be willing to create these tables that are diverse and that are opposing. I think one of the things that we forget, honestly, Ed, is that Congress was created for a debate. It was created for a debate. It wasn't for us to come around the table and all agree. How in the world could we? That's the whole e pluribus unum, right? Out of many, one. But right now we are seeing politicians not even being willing to come to the table or set a table because they hate the other side. And Colorado is missing out.
Let's go. I don't know we're going to have time for water policy, but I want to go somewhere that you touched on there, and that is healthcare policy. And let's talk a little bit about the cost of healthcare. There's a lot of ways we could go, and I don't necessarily want to get into relitigating the Affordable Care Act here, but businesses in particular are concerned about the increasingly rising cost of getting care in hospitals and physicians' office, and how much it is putting a burden on them. What are the ways that the federal government can help to make healthcare affordable without crippling the hospital and physician industry?
We need to look at the lobbying industry, $7 billion a year. $7 billion lobbying industry, not a year, but $7 billion in healthcare and pharmaceutical. Who do you think is paying for that? Premiums. We're paying. We need
True, but we already have limitations on our premiums here. We're only 15% out of every premium that is charged to someone who's buying health insurance can go to the company. The other 85%'s got to go to care. Don't we have to look at the cost of care as well?
Well, I think, yes. And I think healthcare right now is being run more like a poll tax than anything else. Let's think about that. You know, in housing, if you want to live in a golf course, you're going to expect to pay an awful lot for that big, beautiful house. And if you don't have the money, you can buy a one-bedroom apartment or a studio, right? But if you're going to get an MRI, does it ever consider how much you make? Somebody who makes $27,000 a year that needs an MRI, the cost is the exact same if you make $450,000.
That's true.
That's serious. Mm-hmm. That is really serious, because the way our Medicaid works is if you are a family of 4 and you make about $26,000 a year, you qualify. But if you make 27 and you're a family of 4, you have to pay everything that the same $450,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year family has to pay. That's why I say it's a poll tax. You know, it's so egregious. It is so lopsided. And so I don't want to debate the tenets of the Affordable Care Act. I want to stress the importance of health care for everyone, because it's not something that you might need. Everybody needs health care. And the reason the federal government should care is because it should care about the welfare and the well-being of their citizenry. And right now it's not working. It's a careful needle to thread, you know, Medicare for all or private health care. I want to just do what will work for the American people that is the most equitable. So that's why I say health care for all. I want us to come to the table and really see, what do people need. It's interesting because, you know, I come from a more affluent background. And everybody, actually, I'll just say it this way. I came from an all-Republican background. I'm the only non-Republican in my family, except my husband, who's unaffiliated, and I don't count my kids. But I mean, you know, so I understand. They're always complaining, oh, we don't want the government to have this overreach into health care. But I'm going to tell you, every time they hit 65 or 67, you know, because some of my family is getting up there, they can't wait to get on Medicare. And so it's a little bit of a two-sided coin, right? It's just like, you can't wait until the government can support you, because that's how stressful, even for people of means, to have your health care tied to your job, to have premiums that are outrageous. And it's not just outrageous premiums, but the deductibles are outrageous. And so it's not an optional thing that some people need and some people don't need. Everybody needs health care. And we, as the federal government, or the federal government, needs to see, how can we take care of the welfare of our citizenry by ensuring they have access to health care. That's why it has to be an equity issue. It's not an equal issue, it's an equity issue. Now, what I do appreciate about the Affordable Care Act, and what I was upset when I saw how it got distributed in the state of Colorado, was the Affordable Care Act was supposed to create equality, so that everybody would have the same price to, you know, premiums, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what we saw was, like I had mentioned earlier, these redlining of rural and mountain communities, that they're paying 40% more in premiums than people along the Front Range. That's not right. That is absolutely not right. And I think the Colorado General Assembly is trying to change that, you know, to see, I think it's only 20% this next year, and we need to continue to move forward. But those are some of the things that I'm saying, that the federal government, and, you know, as it kind of distributes to the states, we need to recognize that we need at least equality in premiums, but we really need to look more at equity and see what kind of financial burden are we putting on working class families and middle class families. I'll just say this. Economists, well, we continue to see the wealth gap continue to go over, where it's almost mind-numbing, like, oh yeah, well, it got the gap between rich and poor got wider again, and we don't even know what to do with it. We just keep it, and we're like the disappearing middle class. Well, it happened again this year. Studies show that the gap between rich and poor has gotten bigger. Well, economists are literally not known for being the liberal people in the world. Okay, so we probably can agree on that. Economists say the only way to bring the polls of the haves and the have-nots in is by a serious investment in education and healthcare. Because that's what we need. And healthcare is crippling. People are going bankrupt. They're losing their houses because mom got cancer, or because, you know, a child has, you know, I'll tell you, my kid broke his arm. It cost $7,000 for a broken arm. It's ridiculous. You know, so we need to really look at the affordability of healthcare and not make it unattainable. People should not be losing their livelihood. They should not be losing their homes just because of surging, unreachable healthcare costs.
Let me go one other area. This is somewhere you've talked about on the campaign here, and that you're not hearing from a lot of the other candidates, and that is the idea of affordable housing. This has always been viewed as a Colorado issue, not a federal government issue. What is the role of the federal government in ensuring affordable housing, especially in a place like the Denver area where more people are moving in and creating higher prices because of increasing demand. That's a natural market.
Yeah, I probably would have been on the same side, like, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Oh, yeah, affordable housing is more of a state and local issue. There's some supply and demand. The reality is that if you start looking at anything on the East Coast, and I mean, this is not just a Colorado or this isn't even just a Front Range Denver issue. This is becoming a national issue, and I think the federal government needs to address it. I'll just say just a couple things in Colorado. I mean, 272,000 Colorado families are in crisis. You know, if the way formulas are figured, if you pay more than 30% of your income, that's a problem. Well, 272,000 Colorado families are paying over 50% of their paycheck towards housing. And that's actually not just in the Front Range area. I've been traveling around the state, and I'm listening, especially in our tourism. And in our mountain towns, it's incredibly expensive all over the state. So yeah, the federal government can strengthen Section 8. We can do stuff around on tax incentives. And yeah, there's some really beautiful federal block grants that we need to make bigger and more accessible.
Excellent. Real quickly, in the last 30 seconds we have here, tell us how people find out more about you.
Yeah, my website, michelleforcolorado.com, MICHELLE for Colorado.com. You can see a little bit of my policies. You can follow me on social media at MCF Warren. And I hope you do. I'm really excited. I've been enjoying listening to people talk and letting people know my name is Michelle Ferrigno Warren.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you coming on today. This is Ed Sealover for my silent partner today, Jeff Wasden.
We miss you, Jeff.
Yes. This is the Great Senate Race presented by the Colorado Business Roundtable and the Denver Business Journal. Thank you. And I hope you'll tune in soon for our next episode.